Hello, Fort Smith. My name is Andy.
I'm here in front of the economic powerhouse driving the future of Fort Smith's economy for the next 50 years. But wait, it's a generic apartment complex? How can that be? I first wanted this video to have a crazy clickbaity title, and then I swung hard in the other direction. I think I finally landed on somewhere fair and in the middle, but if you're the type of person who would have clicked on either one of these, stay tuned. Fort Smith makes money just like a corporation. And in fact, it is a corporation called a municipal corporation that reports its finances on a balance sheet and an income statement, just like McDonald's or Walmart. Because this is a transportation-focused channel, today we're just talking about one specific line item on those finances: roads. Roads serve the same role that an employee might in a corporation. They generate indirect revenue for the city by getting citizens to work, to go shopping, or go out for dinner. And just like an employee at a corporation, roads take a wage in the form of maintenance. And also like employees, sometimes roads work efficiently to make money for the corporation, or sometimes a road makes things worse and still draws a paycheck. But when a corporation hires an inefficient employee, they can fire or manage out that employee. When a city builds an inefficient road, that's a mistake we citizens live with for the rest of our lives and our children's lives and every generation after that. So before you hire a new road, it's important to make sure it will be efficient. But what makes a road efficient, and how can we measure that? Traveling on a road comes with two costs to a traveler. This is intuitive. You might hear about a new road being built and estimate that if it gets built, it could trim 8 minutes off your commute. So as an individual, a new road intuitively seems like a grand idea for its time-saving benefits. But on a macro level, a city has to balance that 8 minutes of time savings against the price of the road. They can do this by assigning a dollar value to the time savings for each trip along the new road and compare it to the overall price of the road itself. Let's illustrate with a theoretical road connecting Fianna Hills to Chaffee. Our median income in Fort Smith is about $45,233 per year. We can divide that by 2,080 working hours per year, and then divide that by 2 to estimate a household has an average of 2 commuters. Now, if we generously decide that 5% of the 90,000 Fort Smith residents ride the road to work every day to save 16 minutes of round-trip travel per day, for 260 workdays per year, the road saves the city as a whole about $3,392,475 worth of time per year. If the road costs about $16 million to build, this means it would take a bit less than 5 years for the road to pay for itself. But assuming the road lasts a generous 49 years before it has to be replaced, the total value of the road becomes $166,231,275. Since the total value of the road is higher than the 49-year cost, we should build it, right? Well, no. We talked about time, but not distance. An increased time efficiency can actually correlate with a decreased efficiency of distance. This is why some traffic impact studies instead measure VMT, or vehicle miles traveled. To illustrate, our measurement of time savings assumed our travelers drove from discrete points at the same distance every day, such as going to work. But commuters don't just use roads to get to work. They run errands or for pleasure, and are more concerned about efficiency of time over efficiency of distance. For example, if you're willing to drive for 20 minutes to go out to dinner from your home in Fianna Hills, you might not really care how far away the restaurant is, so long as you can get there in 20 minutes. So with the 8 minutes of time savings opened up by our new road, there are whole new areas of the city for you to visit for dinner. And because the new distance you're traveling is further away than the pre-existing restaurants within a 20-minute radius of your house, the new road brings a net increase to the number of miles traveled across the city. In other words, you drive the same amount of time, but because the new road is more efficient with your time, the number of miles you travel has increased. And you're not imagining it. As Fort Smith builds faster roads, our congestion is actually outpacing our population growth at an unsustainable rate. When you hear about Angelinos getting up at 5 a.m. so they can get to work by 8, I worry that our grandchildren in Fort Smith will have the same problem if this trend continues. If this is concerning for you and you would like to learn more, I encourage you to check out this video from Smart Growth America called How an Arcane Rule Helps Justify Destructive Highway Projects. I'll leave a link in the description. The second measurement of road efficiency is actual money. Since roads aren't just a means to travel from A to B as a function of time and distance, we can also measure whether a road is profitable for a city based on the construction we build alongside it. Let's illustrate that. Okay, here's some road our city just received for free from a developer. In the early years of the road's life, maintenance costs are low and the properties zoned alongside it are pushing cash fast into the city's coffers. But after 20 years, the road needs to be repaved. And in another 20 years, it needs to be repaved again. Now, after 50 years, there's no use repaving it, the road needs to be reconstructed from scratch. When we consider all the revenue and all the expenses over 50 years, the road in this hypothetical example broke even for this city. When we count the entire road and all the buildings alongside it, some roads end up generating revenue for their city and others net loss for their cities. So let's apply our scenario to this apartment complex. Every foot I step along this sidewalk is another $2,000 in road maintenance costs that it takes to keep Chad Colley here running smoothly over the next 50 years. And all of these apartments are full of people spending money in Fort Smith generating sales tax revenue for the city. If $2,000 sounds like a lot of money to spend maintaining this road, try considering that the revenue generated by these apartments is over $12,000 for the same foot. That's an efficiency of 467%. I applied the same methodology all over Fort Smith to find out which developments make roads efficient and which developments are making their roads lose money for the city. This doesn't mean an inefficient development is bad. It takes all types of buildings and roads and people to make a city great. But it does give us some insight about how we should choose to let our city grow. If you're interested in my methodology, check out the video description. So what are the most efficient usages of road in Fort Smith? Well, Reserve at Chaffee here was our runaway first place winner. It generated almost 50% more revenue than our second place development. And guess what? Second place is another apartment complex, the Lynx Apartments off Zero Street. The Lynx is efficient for the exact same reason as Reserve at Chaffee, but it loses so much efficiency by virtue of the fact that there's a giant golf course in the middle not generating much revenue for the city. I would also argue that the golf course is driving up the value of the homes surrounding it a little bit, which is true, but the space of the course is too large to outpace the value created by density at Reserve at Chaffee. If the two apartment complexes in first and second place surprised you, maybe third place won't. It's the Ream headquarters, and who can argue, their presence is a large portion of the Fort Smith economy and their footprint on Zero Street is vital. And in fourth place is Graphic Packaging International, with a very similar type of footprint to Ream. And in fifth place is the mall. If the mall didn't have all this excess parking surrounding it, it may have been in first place. So what makes these places so efficient? It all comes down to their use of space. The apartments and the malls are probably obvious. All the apartments and stores are right next to each other. There's more square footage generating revenue instead of sitting empty. It's this concept of empty space that I want to focus on. Empty space has the same infrastructure cost as any store in the mall, but it doesn't generate any revenue for the city. You might think it's convenient that there's so much parking available in Fort Smith, but that waste of space is actually a drag on city finances. Now let's apply the same scrutiny to Ream and Graphic Packaging International. Why did they both do better than, say, Sam's Club? All of that space taken up by setbacks, parking, and green space has the same infrastructure cost of $2,000 per foot, but doesn't generate any revenue for the city. In fact, with an area of 273,055 square feet, the parking lot alone takes up twice as much space as the warehouse itself. Now let's consider the same footprint taken up by parking at Ream. Even with this sizable parking lot, the factory itself takes up a larger portion of the parcel, putting more land to productive use. Of course, like any city, Fort Smith has inefficient roads that lose money for their city too. I'm not going to single out any of our inefficient roads because many of them are people's private homes or businesses. But to give you an example of what inefficient roads all have in common, the most inefficient locations usually have special tax situations, either to promote further growth, or maybe their tax assessment was capped after somebody turned 65. But other than those special situations where the inefficiency is a deliberate decision, the most inefficient locations were simply vacant lots or abandoned, blighted properties. These remind me of an old wives' tale you may have heard too if you also grew up in Arkansas. It was said that Sam Walton wouldn't let the assembly lines at Walmart have any empty space on them. Every product had to be touching because empty space was a waste of money. And the same concept of empty space wasting money applies to our empty lots in Fort Smith as well. But in all cases, the inefficiency comes down to a bad use of space. And other than these obvious cases, the next most inefficient type of development isn't quite so obvious. What do you think it is? It's where some of you are probably watching this video from right now: single-family detached housing. I said I wouldn't single anyone out for this inefficient use of space, so I'll sacrifice myself on the altar. I myself live in a single-family detached house situated on the least efficient type of road, a cul-de-sac. And in the long run, the city is losing money on my house. According to my projection, over the next 50 years, the road in front of my house will cost $24,000 more to maintain than the tax revenue I will contribute to the city's road maintenance funds. If you live in an apartment right now, you're essentially subsidizing me and everyone else who lives in detached housing. And have you ever looked at a map of the housing in Fort Smith? It's almost all single-family housing. The yellow part is the part of the city that's losing more money than it's generating. Of course, whenever you see these maps, it's a little disingenuous because the roads themselves are also yellow. So let's give this a little... Okay, now...
The atrocities are in blue.
Whoa now, Leslie. It takes all types of housing to make a city great, and having plenty of housing at affordable prices is a good thing. After all, parks and recreation don't drive a profit either. It only becomes a problem when our long-term maintenance expenses exceed our revenue. We might be there someday, but...
We do have to watch the ongoing cost of maintenance of all the
roads
that we've got. We've got a lot of
roads.
We're not the only city in this situation, and if we look at how the same situation has played out historically in other cities, you often find a situation where the city is still able to stay alive in a few ways.
I just want to know where all the money's coming from. That's where I'm kind of asking. Andy, you want to dive into that one?
Sure thing, Director Settle. It would be my pleasure to introduce some of my thoughts about how these long-term maintenance costs have been paid in the long run at other cities. And may I please say, if I ever use any footage from a public official in this video or any of my other videos, I'm doing my best to do it in a respectful manner, and in this case, only as an illustration of how some of the important things that I think should be prioritized by the city of Fort Smith are also already being prioritized by some of our elected officials. Number 1. Raising taxes. Fort Smith already reached this point in 1985 when it introduced the 1% sales and use tax that goes directly towards streets, bridges, and drainage. But aside from this, another 1% sales tax was also introduced in 1994. But we cannot keep raising taxes forever. Number 2. Reduce maintenance. You might see people complain about the quality of roads outside of their home or business, and it's often a budget consideration that has led to that situation. But roads are like your teeth. Spending a little bit of maintenance up front saves a lot more money in the long run. That pothole might be a minor annoyance now, but when it eventually injures someone, the cost savings from reduced maintenance don't look so appealing anymore. Number 3. Raising population.
We're going to have people moving here, we're going to have some prosperity here, people are going to be spending money.
But if that population is using the same inefficient infrastructure that created this situation in the first place, all we're doing is digging the hole deeper. The cost to replace all of that new extra inefficient infrastructure goes up. It's like using a credit card to pay off another credit card. And once our population stops growing, the bill comes due. Number 4, state and federal aid.
It's federal money that just was given to us. We're not doing anything.
This might be a good short-term solution for temporary problems, but future government funding for anything on the local level is never guaranteed, and a large percentage of the population, especially in Fort Smith, probably doesn't want to rely on so-called bailout money just to stay afloat. Number 5, build more efficient roads. So the idea here is that now that we know how to measure the efficiency of a road, let's stop digging our hole deeper and commit that any future growth will increase our efficiency to help pay for some of the infrastructure that is losing us money. So if you look at the 5 choices here, maybe I'm crazy, but it seems like the best option is number 5. Unfortunately, because our population is growing and we do have state and federal aid coming in right now, we have time to rectify our past mistakes and make our roads a little more self-sufficient. I'm not the only person interested in this topic, and there are a lot of good ideas for how to do this. I'm not going to advocate for any of these ideas, but I hope this will get some of you thinking about what potential solutions might work best for Fort Smith. 1. Cost-efficient planning commission. Before building a new road or annexing a new road in Fort Smith, what if our planning commission or our board of directors required the developer to model the 50-year net revenue generated by it? Then, if we know a potential development will lose money for the city in the long run, we just don't build it or don't annex it. I know the tendency is to just green stamp any new development, but not every new development is good development. Arizona developers in the middle of the desert have to prove water access for 100 years before they're allowed to build. So proving financial solvency for 50 years isn't a high bar to cross. One of the advantages of this idea is that it doesn't have to be a law. It's just a matter of electing politicians who are aware of this issue and commit to keeping it in mind when they vote on zoning variances. 2. Develop vacant and blighted lots. We're already paying for the infrastructure costs of these lots, so let's make them profitable. South Bend, Indiana had the same problem with urban blight and vacant lots, so the University of Notre Dame worked pro bono with property owners to untangle the complicated legal entanglements preventing them from selling their blighted properties. For vacant lots, the city paid for pre-approved architectural sets and gave them to families for free so new housing could be built more cheaply and with fewer barriers. A subject for further investigation may be to switch away from the level of service, or LOS, model of traffic impact analysis that we require from developers right now. I'm still learning about this myself, but people who have opinions on the subject seem to blame it for a lot of California's traffic problems after it was introduced there in 1969, and it also seems to favor low-density developments on the periphery of the city instead of infill developments, since it measures traffic at specific intersections, and new commuters from outside the central core can dilute their congestion a bit on their way into the city. I don't know, if you know more about this topic than I do, let me know. Number 3, account for long-term maintenance. If we do build new roads, accrue for their long-term maintenance needs as soon as they're built, and continue to accrue for that long-term maintenance debt every month. I don't just mean list the road as an asset on the balance sheet and depreciate the expense. I mean, once the road is created, each month there would be an additional liability accrued to recognize the long-term maintenance need. We save up for our children's college as soon as they're born. Maybe we should be doing something similar for roads. I don't know what the Government Finance Officers Association would have to say about this idea, or even if we are already doing it in Fort Smith, but it would be a good way to catch the eye of anyone reviewing the city's finances. 4. Adjust lot regulations. We all need places to live, and we know that single-family detached housing loses the city money. But this doesn't mean nobody can live in a house. It just might mean adjusting some of our regulations. We could lower the minimum lot size, lower the minimum street frontage, increase the maximum lot coverage, and increase the maximum height allowance. This would mean more house can take up more of its lot, impact the road network less, and generate more revenue for the city while simultaneously costing less. Number 5, land value tax. Our property tax bill measures the value of our land and our house, but we only get taxed on the house part. Some people argue that this system incentivizes people to build cheap houses with low-quality materials and to not take care of their houses. Some people argue that if we take away the tax on the house and tax the land instead, residents will be more incentivized to use less space, or at least use their space more efficiently. They'll also be incentivized to make better houses with better materials. The entire country of Australia uses a land value tax, and we have a few examples in Pennsylvania that have a land value tax as well. Number 6. De-annex or remove deadweight. Memphis, Tennessee started doing this a couple years ago because they cannot afford all of their non-profitable infrastructure on their periphery. This is usually done as a last resort when a city is on the verge of insolvency, but it's still a tool in the toolbox. I'm not sure if Fort Smith has any fingers shooting out of the city that we can de-annex though. But for examples inside the city limits, look for overly wide streets that could be narrowed. I don't know if this is feasible, but if you look at a situation like Vista Boulevard, it's actually 2 separate streets entirely, taking up more infrastructure costs than similar streets around it. What if we gave everyone who lives on Vista Boulevard an extra big front yard and made it a narrow, safe, 2-way street? The city would save money in the long term, and the residents would see their home values increase immediately due to the larger lot size. The residents could also more easily turn out of their driveway depending on which direction they're heading. Number 7. Build over excess parking. This is something we've seen happen with great success in Fort Smith. I left this idea for last because I wanted to end the video on a positive note, because one of the most popular restaurants in town is a shining example of the kind of urban development that will someday make Fort Smith a world-class city. And that example is Texas Roadhouse. If you've been in Fort Smith for a while, you may remember when this lot was just an empty part of the Kmart parking lot. All of that empty parking, and indeed any empty parking space in the city, is just as economic as a vacant or blighted lot. The trick is to build just enough parking that you can still maximize profit for the business, but also make sure that almost every spot is full. And just look at that parking. There are hardly any empty spaces. So Texas Roadhouse, I salute you in your contribution to Fort Smith. I'm glad you're here. Now, if you'll only do something about that flag on your building.
All those years ago that never fade away, and I remember your face. When you hit the ground, I can recall the time and place. On a midnight walk through the old streets, trying to turn back the clock to the days of old. Back to the days when all the things we knew were made of gold. As the world moves on, time sings a song.